Hi, this is Audrey Blair, and you're listening to the Change is Hard podcast, episode 4. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I am excited for today's episode because I am joined by a dear friend who I actually hadn't talked to in a while. Her name is Ellen Radcliff, and she is a therapist. And I wanted to pick her brain about the neuroscience of change. What is going on when we form habits and when we want to change habits? How do we break them? What happens in our brains when we do that? So we dive into that topic and we talk about additional tools and things that we can use in order to help that process along. And another thing that we talk about that is usually not something that comes up very often, which is the grief and loss when it comes to change, even small things. We tend to make grief this really big word and make it about something really heavy, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And how we can use that through our transition and process with change. So here's the episode. Here's our conversation. It was a lot of fun. I hope that you get a lot out of it. Please enjoy. Hello, Ellen. Welcome. Thank you for being here with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to see you. It's been a long time since I've actually seen you or we've caught up or anything like that.
I know. I think it was about a year ago we sat down and did another one of these. So
is that right?
I think so.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Time.
I know. Well, I do appreciate you being here because, full disclosure, that one that we did a while ago, I think I told you I had a little data issue and that file got lost.
Yes. So that was a practice round. We're perfecting it today.
Round. So take 2.
Yeah.
And, sometimes they say it's never as good as the first time, but we're going to try. We're going to do it.
There we go.
We're going to do it. So before we jump into it, and the focus of the podcast is change is hard, and we talk a lot about change and lots of other things beyond that. But really, I love you as a therapist because I want to dig into the neuroscience of what makes change hard and what are some of the things that we can do and how to maybe think of it. And I'm going to pick your brain about some other things as well. But why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I am a therapist. I'm a marriage and family therapist. I'm also a licensed clinical mental health counselor, and I have a small practice in North Carolina. I see people mostly virtually, and we talk about change all the time. Maybe not in so many words, but certainly all therapy is about change, whether it's change in behavior, change in the way you think about something, change in perception. So my whole job life is about change. So I'm excited to dive into it today.
Oh, fantastic. That was a question I was going to ask you. Do you think of yourself as a change manager or change practitioner in your practice? And is that the right way to think about therapy, is like helping to change something? So, but yeah, we'll get into that in just a moment. So that's cool. All right. I love it. Good. Cause I might have some therapy questions for me too, while we're at it.
Okay, great. I have a little mini session in there too.
Little mini session. So I talk with my clients about change, a lot of the same things: changing behavior, changing mindset, changing the way you think about things, changing the way you see yourself. Because in leadership development, a lot of times people get stuck with, well, I'm in this role, or I can't see myself there, or I don't know what that looks like, or I know what I want to be, but I'm having a hard time getting there. So I talk about developing that self-concept and then stepping into that person, but requires really so much mindset. And there are some behavior things, and there are some knowledge perhaps that you might need to learn. But the first thing people go to is books. And I'm like, that's not where you're going to find it. It's not in the books. Yeah. You have probably everything you need already with you, and just kind of applying that thing. So as we think about change itself, just from your perspective, what makes it so hard?
Well, I think I mean, what you're saying makes so much sense. I don't think we can change any behavior unless we first change the way we think about something, at least not long term, right? It's unsustainable if we don't change the way we think about something to change our behavior long term. But I think our first barrier in why change is so hard is the neuroscience of it, what's happening in our brain, right? Every time we engage in a certain behavior or a certain pattern of thinking, there's this common phrase used in the clinical world, neurons that fire together, wire together. So when you engage in a pattern of behavior, for example, if you're bored and you eat when you're bored one time, your brain is going to form neural circuitry that bonds those two together, fuses those two unrelated events together. So the next time you're bored, your brain's going to say, oh, I know what to do. When we're bored, we eat, right? And so every time you engage in this pattern of behavior or pattern of thinking, it creates a neural pathway and it deepens it. So I like to think about it like a snowy hill, right? When you go up to the top of a snowy hill, you sled down it, it creates a groove in the snow. And then the next time you go up to the top of it, you're bored and you eat, you go down that again. And every time you go down the snowy hill, that groove in the snow gets a little bit deeper and deeper and deeper. So, years later, when you're like, hey, I want to break this pattern or break this behavior or this way of thinking, it's not that it's impossible. You can forge a new path in that snowy hill, a new neural pathway. That's what's so amazing about our brains, is that they are malleable. They're very plastic in nature. And so they can form new neural circuitry. But it's very difficult because once you're in that groove, that rut that you've created over that years or decades of thinking and behaving in one certain way, you have to jump out of that groove to form a new neural pathway. So that's part of why it's so difficult to create change, why it feels so daunting, because we're all stuck in those ruts of thinking and behaving, and it feels very difficult and daunting to create a new snowy hill, if you will.
Yeah, I love that example. And in reading books like Atomic Habits, and there's another habit book that talks about if you want a new behavior associated with something else that you're already doing to maybe make it not so difficult. So maybe that's where they're getting that from. How long though does it take before a habit is formed? So let's say that first time I'm bored or I'm watching TV or I'm watching something. I like sports. So let's say I'm watching a game and I eat. Is it that feels good? So then my body's like, oh, this is fantastic. So then the next time, when does it start becoming a habit where that becomes automatic?
Yeah, the first time you do it, that neural circuitry is created, and then you do it again, and it deepens. It becomes more and more of a habit. So the very first time, our brains want to look for patterns, right? So it feels comfortable with patterns. It doesn't like chaos and things that are disconnected. So the first time you are watching a game and you eat some chips, the next time you sit down and watch that game, you're going to have this slight inclination to do the same thing because your brain has already formed that neural circuitry. The thing is, though, let's say the next time you sit down and watch a game and you say, okay, I'm not going to eat, I'm going to have a cup of tea, right? That old neural pathway is still there. In fact, it never goes away. So that's what is so difficult about change, especially if you've engaged in a pattern of behavior or thinking for a very long time. You think about people who are alcoholics, for example. They never say, I'm recovered. They say, I'm in recovery, because that old neural pathway never goes away. Even if it's been 30 years that you've been going down that new snowy path, creating new neural circuitry saying, I don't drink when I'm sad or happy or devastated or whatever, right? That old path is still there. Now it's been snowed over, so it doesn't grip you as hard. It doesn't tempt you as much, but it's always there. So even when we change and create a new neural pattern in our brain, we still have to be mindful. We still want to be aware, and we want to be a little bit on the defense to make sure that we're not pulled toward that old snowy path, because we're always going to be tempted to.
Gosh, and that's where the awareness is. So the very first time you put two things together, I didn't realize that. I thought it took some time before it started formulating a pattern. I know, your brain looks for patterns, but I did not realize that. It makes me rethink everything now.
Well, it's not that the first time, like I said, neurons that fire together, wire together, but every time you sled down it, it's going to get deeper and deeper. So the first time, it's not it's not going to pull you the way that a habit that's been formed for 6 years is going to. But yeah, the very first time, it creates that neural pathway. And then the next time, if you don't do it, that neural pathway it's like you've sled down that hill once. So it's a very light temptation, a very light pull. But the more you go down it, the deeper and deeper that rut gets.
Yeah. And how much does emotion or feeling play into that? Because if you do something, you put two things together. Let's say I'm watching the game. It's a very exciting game. I'm eating these with chips and then we win and then I'm feeling all good. Like, does that also go to strengthen that bond or that combination of, that's why food and football go together. Like, I don't know if you watch football, but every other commercial is like food and chips. And I mean, it just goes together.
Yeah.
All those things make you feel good. How much do your emotions play into that?
I don't watch football unless there's food. That's the interesting part to me. Yeah, I mean, I think your emotions all, the thing is like we said, neurons that fire together wire together. So your emotions enhance. If you've watched the game, eat the food, and then it made you feel good, that just enhances that neural pathway, that snowy hill that's been created. And the other thing is that when we, in past times before this football game with the chips, if we were happy and we like to eat when we're happy, that's only going to reinforce this new neural pathway that's being formed, right? Hey, when I'm happy, I like to eat. When I'm bored, I like to eat. When I'm sad, I like to eat, right? And so that's only going to push that neural pathway even further to, create that new neural circuitry, because our brain remembers, oh, when you're happy, you like to eat. When you're sad, you like to eat.
Mm-hmm.
That's my problem.
Oh my gosh.
Every emotion I like to eat.
I remember I just went through I'm still in it, and I had to get myself together because had gained some weight, and not so much I had gained weight, but at my age, I was so hard to lose it. I was like, this is not working. And my body's response to the food is changing. And so, yeah, I've gone through this whole thing, and I can tell my brain, it's still there, but I can tell when I was really trying to clamp down or do things differently, how intentional, like I really had to fight the intention of doing the automatic things. You don't realize how much when you're cooking, how much you nibble or snack or eat a meal before you eat a meal because I got to taste everything. Or you walk by the pantry and you're just grabbing something. And so cutting all of that out, I realized how much, and I had fooled myself because I don't consider that we eat necessarily bad, but I realized how much more I was consuming than I was even aware of. Let me ask you this. You can tell me, and maybe I need to change something, because one of my essentials always as a coach is coaching mastery. So I'm always wanting to improve. So I talk about the connection, the mind-body connection, the mind-body-emotion connection. Mm-hmm. And I talk about there's a circumstance which tends to be neutral, but we apply some kind of judgment on it. We think about that circumstance and we go, oh, immediately you judge it, whether it's good or bad. A lot of times we like to put things in these categories of good or bad. Mm-hmm. And then that is what produces, your thought about it produces an emotion or a feeling, and we act out of our emotions and our feelings. Is that accurate? I've also read the opposite, where it's like, well, you have a feeling, you think about it, and then you ask, where do our actions come from?
Yeah, well, actually, I think it does all go back to neural circuitry, because when something happens, someone does something or says something, you look at that situation and you judge it. There have been years of neural circuitry created in your brain that allow you to look at that, whatever happened, that situation, and say, I judge that as good or bad or embarrassing. Because even back to when we were children, our parents would look at something like that and judge it that way, or our coach or our teachers or our siblings. And so then now that neural circuitry has been created. So what we don't realize is that, like you're saying, some of these automatic responses to things that we're not even aware of have been so deeply ingrained, even from a time in our childhood where we weren't even aware that these things were being formed in our brains. So then as adults, when we do become aware, that's why it feels so difficult to go back and say, wait a minute, where did I get this? I like to use the word distortion a lot. Where did I get this distortion from, where I applied this meaning to this situation or this way of thinking or behaving? So your question, do our actions come from emotions or ways of thinking? I'm not sure there's a clear answer there. I think that sometimes it comes from one or the other, and sometimes I think it comes from both. It's sort of like a connected circle of a pattern. Our behaving, our thinking, and our emotions all kind of work together to create our schematics of thinking, how we categorize things in our brains, how we react to things. And a lot of them are rooted in distortion. And so that's what I do with clients is we try to go back and say, where did this form? Where did you pick up this distortion that it's wrong to do this or that, or it's not okay, it's not the right way? And then once we unpack that a little bit, we're freed up from that distortion, and then we can say, okay, now what do you believe without that distortion affecting you? In what way do you want to react to this or judge this?
Fantastic. Okay, great. So as long as I'm not leading in the wrong
No,
way.
I think it's great.
But yeah, you bring up something, because I also think, yeah, it's family back to childhood, but I also think the culture that we're in matters, whether it's our work culture, of course, our family culture, and where we spend the majority of our time. I think even society plays a role in telling us what's right or what's wrong, and where then do we determine that view, that world view? Because sometimes that can be, and that's a whole nother conversation. Maybe we can talk about that. We can talk about that another time, because that's a whole nother thing. Yeah, but yeah, to your point though, a lot of times things will happen and we make it mean something about us. We internalize it and we go, oh, that must mean there's something wrong with me, or I'm a bad person, or I can't do that. And failure is one of those things. I talk a lot about failure, and people have all this crazy distorted ways that we think about failing, especially those who have a tendency to want to have this perfectionism going on, where it's like, oh, everything is perfect, it's all or nothing. If I don't hit this, then it's a failure. And I don't know, what is the thing with failure that is so strong? What is that? What are we so afraid of when it comes to failing at things?
I think this is no clinical backing necessarily, though there's lots of literature on self-worth, but I think we all have this core insecurity from early in our lives that we are not good enough. We're not worthy of love. We're not good enough as is. So we have to earn our worth. And we all internalize that differently, how to earn our worth. Sometimes we mask certain parts of us and only show other parts, or try to show other parts so that we can earn the love and connection that we so desperately desire with other people. Then when we get it, there's this part of us that remembers, oof, if they really knew all the parts of you, they wouldn't love you the way that they do. And so that just fuels this insecurity even more. So what I've seen with my clients is that they're all operating out of this distortion. I'm not inherently good enough, and I have to earn my worth so that I can be loved by other people. That's kind of what drives them, right? Or be accepted by other people, have that connection. And so I think failure really threatens that. If I fail, then I lose my love from other people, my very carefully pieced together pseudo self-worth that I've worked so hard for, and then I'm all alone and I have nothing. I think that really, maybe it's too cliche to go there that quickly, but I do think that's all of our core fear, is being alone, being lonely. And I think we all kind of work so hard to avoid that through different things. If we achieve success in business, then I'll be good enough. If I achieve success in my home life, then I'm good enough. If I do this or that, then I'm good enough. So I think it all stems from that self-worth.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I that's interesting, because I talk about very similarly, not necessarily in the therapy way, but showing up every day in the space as I have to prove myself. And we break that down. Like, what do you need to prove? One, you already have the job. Two, who are you trying to prove it to? And sometimes they're like, well, I was told I need to prove X, Y, or Z. But how they're interpreting that, and what do you make it mean about me? What are you making it mean about you? Yeah. Is something that tends to come up quite a bit. Yeah. And so then from that space, then how do we get through that? Because I talk about understanding your personal value proposition. So any room that you walk into, a lot of times, well, it depends on who I'm talking to, and I'm going to generalize a little bit. There are certain segments that will walk into a room and they're like, okay, here's what's missing. I'm going to be the glue, and I'm going to fill in that gap. I'm going to be that because that's what's missing in this room. Other people will walk into the room and they go, oh my gosh, all these people are amazing and they have all these amazing things. I have none of that. And immediately go, I don't belong here for that reason. And then there's other variations of that. But understanding, no matter where you're stepping into, what your value is as you step in, what that experience with you, what you're bringing to the table, how do we kind of turn that on, or how do we build that foundation so we're not so insecure, or this fear of failing, or again making it mean something about us. I'm not worthy if I fail, or if I don't do well.
Yeah. Well, first, being aware, like we said, being aware of that distortion. I have this inherent distortion that I'm unworthy and that I need to earn my worth by being like everyone else, or being the best in the room, or whatever that distortion is. Being aware of that distortion is really important. I would call it a part of you. There's a part of you that believes that distortion. And sometimes I think we try to war with our parts. We make that, oh, that's a bad part of me that I need to eradicate. I don't think that's the right way. I think that feels really dichotomous and like this internal war, and that's never really effective. I think what we want to do is have compassion for that part and try to understand where they're coming from so that we can come alongside of them and help eradicate the distortion while still having compassion for where that distortion came from. So being aware of it and being compassionate about that distortion, I think, are really important. And then I would say that shifting our mindset from that black and white. I had a client recently say, I said to her something like, hey, that's true. You're not where you want to be yet, but you're not at ground zero. You're doing it. Like, you're in the process. You're doing it. And she just broke down crying. She was like, I'm doing it. Like, she had never thought that before. And that was so powerful to her to think, I don't have to be done yet, but I've started. I'm in the process of it. And I think shifting our mindset to that messy middle, if it doesn't have to be all or nothing, like you said, we're doing it. We're in the process of changing that pattern of behavior. We're in the process of learning the skills we want to learn in order to be where we want to be professionally or personally or emotionally and mentally. The other thing too, is I think we have such a scary culture right now, pop culture kind of, pop psychology with self-care. That's such a buzzword. We got to practice self-care. And I had a client the other week say something like, I'm doing all the things I should be doing. I'm going to the doctor. I'm trying to sleep enough. I'm drinking a lot of water. I'm going on walks. I'm meeting with people for dinner, et cetera, et cetera. And she's like, but I don't feel any better. I'm doing all the self-care things, but I'm not feeling better. And I said, well, self-care starts inside. You have to care about yourself, all your parts, even though ones that sometimes you don't like, in order that should fuel your self-care. So it's not just about drinking enough water and going to bed. It's being aware, I am worthy of enough sleep. I am worthy of enough water. I'm worthy of social interaction. And that can fuel out of me to do those things that fuel that part of your heart, those parts of you, but it has to start internally. You're not just going to do those things and then automatically care about yourself. You have to start there.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, because a lot of times, again, we want to jump right to the behavior and go, oh, I just have to check these boxes and do these things without focusing and thinking about internally, do I even believe that stuff? Same thing. I feel the same way about mantras and affirmations. They're fantastic and they can work, but it's internal. It's not if I just say this thing that I absolutely don't believe 1,000 times and suddenly I'm going to start believing. Like, you actually have to start figuring out how to internalize what you're saying or what you're trying to change about you or your feelings or all of those things. And so jumping right to the behavior without dealing with the correct issue. And that's the next question I wanted to ask you is, I think that it matters that we deal with the right thing. Because if we start changing stuff that we're like, well, that's not even the core, then maybe some of that work is very helpful. And sometimes you start down a path and you realize, okay, maybe that's not it. But how do we then figure out, what is it that I need to change?
Well, I think that's why self-work, whether it's through therapy or life coaching, is sometimes it feels so convoluted. I don't think it's convoluted, but I think it does feel that way to clients sometimes, because you're right. Sometimes you start changing one thing and you're like, wait a minute, this is tied to something totally different. And it's true, even with our brains, everything, like we said, neurons that fire together, wire together. So all these things can be really fused together. that we don't even recognize. So I do think that nothing is ever lost. If you start working down a certain path and you realize, oh, we got to make an about face and go down a different path, great. We didn't waste any time. Nothing is lost. We still gained a lot of things. I think sometimes we think of things so linearly. I got to go down this path and it's only down this path. I think, especially with this kind of self-work, it's much more circular in a way. If you work down a certain path, you don't have to go all the way back to the beginning and go down the other path, down a different path from the beginning. It always puts you further down that other path that you want to work on as well. So I don't think it's necessary to think, oh no, we got to go back and start over. That's never what happens. You're already further down that path that you want to go down.
Yeah, that's a great thing to remember, because I think a lot of times you're like, oh, this is the wrong thing, and I got to start all over at ground zero. That's definitely not the case. I do have this thing though. I don't know that it's necessarily related. I talk about the 5 issues that you're probably trying to solve, but you're trying to solve everything as if it were a problem. And I break it down into puzzle, problem, dilemma, paradox, and mystery. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about dilemmas, because a dilemma is you have an issue. There's multiple different ways that it can be solved, but none of them really feel that great. Because if a dilemma then will deal with or interfere with some value or some core value that you might have. You as a therapist, there's confidentiality. But at the same time, if there's something going with the client, there's a point at which you're going to have to break that confidentiality and then go do something else. And so probably neither of those decisions feel great, because then the client may not feel, they'll be like, oh, you've betrayed me. But on the other hand, you're like, but if this goes through, I could not live with myself if I don't act and break your trust and act in this way. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, dealing with dilemmas?
I think we do have to sometimes weigh. I mean, this happens in our daily life where our life is full of decision making. We always have to weigh certain values and decisions, and we kind of have to prioritize them a little bit. I think that actually is what a lot of people come to therapy for, and they don't even realize that that's what they need help in, is just prioritizing. This is my value. This is my value. This is my value. Sometimes they compete against each other, and we need to prioritize. And so, yeah, it's true. You're going to have to make a decision, and sometimes you're not going to feel great about it, but you can say, I did the best I could with the options that were laid out before me.
Yeah. And you say that, and actually I think that's a lot of reasons why people do coaching as well. Yeah. They're like, gosh, if I'm content, that means I'm not striving or don't want to do more, or that means complacency. And it's not that all or nothing, but sometimes there are some sacrifices, sometimes temporary, but there are sacrifices one way or the other. Yeah. And you get to decide which path you're going to take and which is the one that's going to be the most fulfilling for you. Same thing with people want to talk a lot about the whole work-life balance thing. I have my own opinion about what that is, but I always work with, what does that mean to you? Because balance doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be 50-50.
Right.
And in certain stages of life, it's going to require more of one than the other. Yeah. And maybe earlier in your career, you're going to maybe sacrifice a little bit of this in order for later on you have more of that free time, for example. But trying to maintain this crazy equal balance in all areas of your life, in my opinion, is impossible to do. Yeah. I think overall, over the span of your working or over the span of things, that there's some balance there that you feel great about. But I don't know that you can boil that down to day or week. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what's coming to my mind right now is how important reflection is in change. Sometimes we just live in a culture that does not value reflection. We value doing, accomplishing, succeeding. But I think reflection is such an important part of that, so that we can zoom out. One day a week, if you take a day to zoom out and reflect over your life in general, then you can sort of see the patterns. You know what? Generally, I'm spending a little bit too much time at work, or I'm not spending enough time at work. You're right. It doesn't have to be this 50-50, but if we're going to prioritize and say my values are my family comes first, my work comes second, but my work is very important, it's a close second, then when we reflect, we can zoom out and say, wait a minute, how has my time reflected at that this past week or this past month? So I think reflection is important. In some ways, daily. I think it's very important weekly. And I think it's even important beyond that. Every couple of months, I think we need to be kind of getting away, reflecting. And then what I do too, just personally, is every year I reflect on an even further out level, even more zoomed out, and say, what have I been giving my time, my attention, my focus, my anxiety to? And how do I want to change that going into this next year? So I think we need to have multiple checkpoints of reflection in our life, even at different levels of zoomed out perspective.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that, reflection, because I talk about that as well. And immediately people are like, well, I don't have time for that. How do you not have time to reflect?
Okay, you do while you're driving.
Yeah. I mean, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I always start with at least 5 minutes. Even just, hey, what went well today? What didn't go so well today? I mean, even if it's just just little things. And setting that intention. The other thing is about setting that intention and zooming out. And that's why I'm on this quest right now. I'm getting ready to send out this email series about decluttering your calendar, because over the last couple years or so, I've put together the way that people manage their time and their calendar says a lot about how they manage their mindset.
Great point.
And so right now with a lot of my clients, I'm like, we're going through this process of we're clearing out 20% of your calendar so that you can have some thinking time. For just like you talked about. Like, I see your eyes got big, so maybe we need to do that with you too. But anyway.
Yeah, I know I'm being convicted personally here. Yeah, I like to call it margins, building in margins into your day, into your calendar.
Right. And some of that is just, as you said, different levels of thinking. Maybe for the week, what does that look like? When do I build in time for that? When do I think about the strategy for my team or my own personal strategy for my career or personal development? And what does that look like? And how do I focus on developing the relationships that I want to develop? It just doesn't happen. You may have, hey, I want to be this kind of leader. And just because you wrote it down, it's not going to happen unless you intentionally think about it and go forward and do it. But that means carving out time. And it's so funny because I was working with a client on this, and I said, well, about how many hours a week do you work? And she was like, probably about 50 or so. I was like, okay, well, let's, 20% of that, that's 10 hours a week that we need to carve out. And she was like, okay. And I was saying, that is not adding it to the beginning of your day or adding it to the end of your day. She was like, oh, good call out. Because that's exactly what I was going to do, was just like, I'll just start at 6 a.m. And I was like, that is not what we're talking about. Yeah. And that's what we go to. I'll just start at 5 a.m., 4:30 a.m. No. It's making it worse. We're carving out, we're making you a priority in your day. That's right. You becoming more of a priority. And we look at, well, what does your calendar say to you? If I were to look at your calendar, how would I describe it? And then most of the time, everyone shakes their head like, oh my gosh, you don't want to see my calendar. And especially when they come into a coaching session, like huffing and puffing and all exhausted. And I'm like, okay, let's start making time for you so you can figure out what some of your longer term and shorter term plans are. But having that reflection time built in is so key. Yeah. Starting with the inside out.
I love that, because I think we all have this overinflated sense in the Western world of what we can accomplish in a day versus what we're actually capable of if we balance all of those things. We talked about self-care, self-worth, your relationships outside of work, things like that. So if we really want to have it all, we have to really change our expectations around what we can accomplish in a day. And you mentioned earlier just the word intention in talking about change. And I think that's so important. We talked about that neural circuitry that's created. The thing that can help combat that neural circuitry the most is our frontal lobe, which holds our values, our intention. The problem is when we don't check in with that frontal lobe, with the values and the intention on a regular, daily, sometimes hourly basis, we will lose. The intention will not fuel our change. And then we're white knuckling it through. And that's unsustainable. We can do that for a certain amount of time, but we cannot enact lasting change unless we enact our frontal lobe, our intention behind it, the why, the motivation behind it. And that's what that reflection time is for. Without that reflection time, we can't have lasting change.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Love that for sure. And even it's interesting because you say throughout the day, because sometimes I will write down, like for me in the morning, I'll write down, gosh, what is it that I'm going to be intentional about today? And sometimes it has nothing to do with my work or business. Sometimes it's like, you know what? I'm just going to be more loving today. Like sometimes I just have to focus on just some things for me, as you said, working from the inside out. And that could be more loving to my husband, my children. But a lot of times it's about just being more loving to me because, as you said, we overestimate what we can get done in a day. But at the same time, I think we underestimate what we can actually accomplish longer term.
Yep.
And sometimes I'm often surprised by, I'll have a couple days where I may accomplish like just a couple of things on my whatever list or whatever I have set out. And I'm getting to this point where I'm like, you know, that's great. Because it took time for me to, one, get into that flow. So if I'm writing, it took time for me to get there, to get into that creative space, to be able to actually get something down, get something out, to fight off all the distractions. I go to like Amazon.com is my friend. I'm just like, I probably should block that off my browser for a little while. And I've had to really be conscious and be aware of how I think about what I'm able to accomplish in a day. Because what happens is at the end of the day, I'm like, oh no, I haven't done enough. So then I'm back in the office at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. And I'm like, let me find something to do because I don't feel like I got enough done today.
Right.
And I think that that's so important to go, no, okay, whatever it is that you got done was fine. Now, if you reflected, when I do reflect, I go, you know what? But I did spend a lot of time doing things I shouldn't have been doing or didn't want to be doing. Then I can work on that the next day and be a lot more intentional about getting X, Y, or Z finished.
Yeah. I think if we all just shift our measure of success to be more, I would say connection based, because I'm a therapist. I don't know if that's too hokey for people, but
woo woo.
Yeah, woo woo for people. But to be more connection based. Like for example, when I got married, I thought I saw a lot of my peers turn into Bridezilla to ensure that they had the prettiest, most up to date wedding, and everything went so perfectly. And I thought, I want my wedding to look nice and people to enjoy their time, and I want to enjoy it, but I don't want to go about it in such a way that I stomp all over my very intention behind this, to celebrate our union and to celebrate our family that helped us get to where we are. So I will tell you, at my wedding, we had the most ridiculous dance floor because I left it up to someone else, and he said, don't worry, I'll rope off a section. And he literally put ropes on the ground. It looked terrible. But I decided I'm going to shift my measure of success from having the most perfect wedding to the intention behind it, which is the connection that I experienced with people, the connection people experience there, other people feeling honored, our relationship being celebrated. I think if we do that on a day-to-day, instead of my measure of success today will be getting my to-do list done, my measure of success today will be chipping away at my to-do list in a way that honors me and the people important to me in my life, right? So sometimes, sure, we reflect on our day and think, oh, you know what? I did a lot of things that were not productive, and probably tomorrow I need to not get on Amazon or Facebook or whatever. But sometimes we reflect and say, yeah, I didn't get all my to-do list stuff done, but I did have a really special conversation with my daughter that wasn't planned, or with my friend, or I had an unexpected lunch with a coworker, and that was an unexpected thing on my to-do list, but that's much more important in the spirit of connection that I'm trying to live my life in. So therefore, my measure of success is not what did I do, but how did I do it? How did I go about it?
Mm-hmm. Which is also why focusing on clearing out 20% of your calendar gives you space for those kinds of things as well, without stressing you out more than what you already are. 100%. That relationship, and there's a difference between, hey, the person that always bops in your office and, hey, you got 15 minutes, and an hour and a half later, you're not getting anything done. That's a different thing. But having that breathing room, that space for those unexpected, the urgency things, but also those unexpected, maybe, hey, I'm just going to walk around and just connect with a few people that I just haven't even had an opportunity to talk to. So maybe you're working remote, but I'm going to ping or do a little coffee chat or something like that. And that's when those unexpected relationships are formed and you find out things. And yeah, to your point, those connections where you're not feeling like I have to prove myself because I'm feeling so alone and I'm not part of the club, versus no, we're all in this together. We're all just trying to figure it out. And so I can slow down some of the pace and slow down some of these things. And I know organizations don't make it easy because they've got, I think sometimes what leadership puts out, we then, as it goes down the chain, gets misinterpreted as, okay, we're just we're just a cog in the wheel, and the wheel is the thing that's moving the fastest. Right. And I think we just have to break that. We got to be able to say, okay, I know how I connect to these larger goals, but how I do that matters so much more than just checking off all these boxes. And in the same way, even thinking about from a leadership and career design, checking all the boxes still isn't going to get you to where you want to go. There is an intention. There is thinking about it more deeply. There are the relationships, all the things that we've just been talking about, and reflecting and knowing how you're going to deal with unexpected things, especially now in this world that we're living in. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of confusion. And how we deal with those things matters more than the technical aspect of the job, if you will.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, like we were saying before, when people say, I need a better work-life balance, I think that's what they're talking about a lot of time, is that I don't have enough time to care about the things that are actually a higher priority to me than work, because my to-do list is taking over my life. When we can be intentional and prune our lives and say, you know what, this is important, but I need to prune it. I need to clip it off for today. I need to have these 3 things that are on my to-do list. I can realistically get these 3 things done with some margin. If my child calls me, if a colleague walks in, or if something more urgent pops up, I need to have some space, like you said, some breathing room, some margin to take care of this. I think that is really what people are after when they say, I need a better work-life balance. They need intention and they need pruning.
Yes, I agree. And again, I'm back to that, carving out that time in the calendar for that, to be able to give yourself that space and think about that a little bit more. So yeah, that's great. So I'm glad that actually aligns with what I'm working on right now, which is really cool. That was not planned at all. So what are some other kind of, we're coming up on time here a little bit, what are some other nuggets that I didn't get to, or that I didn't ask you, that you might want to share?
Yeah, well, I just think too, I think we talked about a lot in terms of why is change so hard. There's neural circuitry we're up against. We have to engage our frontal lobe and the intention. We talked about self-worth and how that affects change. I think the last kind of thing around change that I would think is that change always involves grief. Like even what we were just talking about, pruning our lives and building in some margin, that involves something lost, something that previously gave us worth, something that became comfortable for us. And even with positive change, even with good change, even with change that we've wanted for a long time, comes something lost always. I remember being pregnant with my first child, and one night my husband and I were watching a movie, and I just started bawling because I realized these nights are going to be few and far between. We won't be able to just sit on the couch and watch a movie unexpectedly for the next 18 years. We're our sentence. But that is something we planned for, something that we wanted to have a child. Even for good things that you plan for, there is something lost. And so I think just as a society in the Western world, we're not great at grieving. We try to avoid grief. We try to avoid negative feelings. I think we need to get a little bit better at leaning into that grief, allowing it to be there. Sometimes we qualify grief. Well, that doesn't count because someone else I know just lost their parent. And so that's a much bigger grief. So I have no claim on grief over this tiny little change in my life. But I think owning it, saying, no, I do feel some grief over that. I can also feel joy simultaneously about other things in my life, but I feel some grief over that. That's worthy. That's honorable. We need to honor that grief and allow it to be there, and then let it to pass on when it's ready.
Yes, the grief aspect of change. I love that, especially for things that you want, and working with. Well, even just from a career perspective, you changing roles, or a lot of times I'm working with people who are leading a team where they were once peers and now they're leading this team. Yeah. That's a huge transition. I think people kind of blow it off like, well, it's just an attitude, but your relationships in many ways has to change. It has to change. Yep. if now you are leading this team and how you talk to your team and all of that, not that it certainly doesn't need to be bad, but that relationship within the work environment does need to shift. And there is a grieving. Sometimes I will go through periods of lamenting. I will lament things. Sometimes relationships don't turn out the way that you want them to or think that they should. And so you grieve that in order to let that go and allow yourself that space. No, I do love that. And even as you were saying that, I was thinking about even just some of the shifts and some of the things that I've had to do, and having a glass of wine with dinner. Well, before it would be several times a week, just having a glass. And now I'm like, I'm going to wait till the weekend. But that's something that maybe we have enjoyed together in the past, but now I feel like I'm breaking contract, or I'm breaking some unspoken rule or something. It's never a big deal, but there is that little bit of that pressure of like, oh no, he pulled out 2 glasses. I must,
Right.
I must have a glass of wine. When I can go, no, I think I'll have, and I'll just have a sip of yours, or I'll try it and move on. But yeah,
but that is grief, right? Because that was a point of connection before, multiple times a week for you and your husband. And then now to break that part of your connection, I think there's a way to communicate it where you say, oh, I really want to. I love when we get to savor this wine together. But, right, I've prioritized some other things in my life. And right now, that glass of wine is not at the top of the priority list. My intention in changing whatever, my eating patterns or my drinking patterns are. And so, but yes, there is that grief, and he will have his own grief over it too. And recognizing that even grieving together can still create that connection. I'm not saying wailing and tearing your clothes and crying that you're not having a glass of wine with him, but acknowledging it even does so much to assuage that grief and even disconnection that can be created in that situation.
Yeah. Yes. And I think because grief can be such a big word. Right. And again, it's the thoughts we put on it, because we make it so heavy. It doesn't have to be heavy. It does not have to be heavy at all. And just even, there's just so much that we just don't even recognize. I'm just experiencing a little bit of grief here. That relationship needs to change. You probably feel it when you have a client that's moving on. I know I feel it when I have a client that's moving on. Just that little bit of, I have some clients who are like, oh, my Tuesdays will never be the same now, because we met on Tuesdays, and after however long we've been working together, now they're like, oh no, what am I going to do now? And so, so every once in a while I get these pings from past clients, and a couple of them come back.
That's needed sometimes.
Like round 2, round 3. But that aspect of it. And that's great. And I feel great because to me, then I know there was a connection that was made. There was a genuine connection that was made, and the impact, but also that they are moving on and doing fantastic things is also a fantastic for me to recognize.
It's a great point you're making, that even when we reach our goal, right? That's the goal. When I meet with a client, that's the goal, is to get them out of therapy. But still, there's grief at the end of it. And so even when we reach our goal, there's something lost. There's a change that's enacted, and therefore something to grieve and mourn, even while we're simultaneously thrilled that we reached our goal. So yes, I just think grief is a part of our daily life. We all need to get better at recognizing it and not acknowledging it and letting it be there when it needs to be.
Yeah, like every morning I grieve, like I'm not sleeping anymore. Just let me.
What is that about? Aging. Me neither.
Can I sleep a little bit more? Yes, but I do feel it, because now my kids. You asked before we got on the call. You have driving kids. My daughter's driving now. I don't take them to school anymore.
But that's why you're not sleeping, because she's driving on the road. That's terrifying. Oh my gosh.
But now in the mornings, I'm like, are you, like, I'm now been limited to, are you guys up? Like, that's my role now. Are you guys up? Do you need help from mom anymore? Is there anything I can do? And if they leave without saying bye, I'm like, what's happening?
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
So it is so wild. I'm excited for that and that growth, but at the same time, there is a grieving of that transition into this new way. The next phase. Wow, so crazy. Yeah. So, no, I totally get that. And that is an important aspect that we really don't think about at all, and give ourselves the time. We dismiss it, as you said, or we think there's something wrong with that. No, we acknowledge it and take that on so that we can move on. So fantastic. I love it. Well, Ellen, What a thrill.
Yes, thanks for having me on. Great conversation today.
For sure. I appreciate it so much. And so I'm actually also looking forward. We're going to have our little business retreat getaway here coming. Earlier I was thinking about it. I was like, oh, that's next month. I was like, no. It's not till December, but
soon.
We're really soon. We're at the end of October. I can't even.
I know. I think it's like 6 weeks away. We're going to go on our little trip. So you're teaching me how to have some of that margin, some of that reflection time. I've never done this work retreat before, but you're teaching me how to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're going to have fun and we'll get some good stuff out of it. So fantastic. Well, thank you again for your time. I appreciate it so much. And I will talk to you later.
All right, thanks.
If you want to work with me one-on-one to get unstuck and get clear on where your leadership journey is taking you, sign up for a free consult with the link in the show notes.